Isn't it kind of wild to think about the fact that we are now in the year that Black Ops 2 canonically takes place? That game is no longer set in the distant or near future, it's set now, and it's not exactly news that Call of Duty Black Ops 2 did a stellar job at predicting the future in a multitude of ways with this game, with technology and AI evolving at a rapid rate, leading to many changes in military tactics and how combat is carried out, and with the world becoming ever more dependent on technology in the ways that we interact with it as people, and the geopolitical tensions rising. It's almost like Black Ops 2 predicted the future to a T. I mean, it's kind of a testament to the visionary quality of this game, but if you think it's scary that Black Ops 2 has pretty much become real, just wait until we get to the 2060s and Black Ops 3 becomes real. That's the real scary stuff, I think. But for now, the only real thing wrong that Black Ops 2's prediction was incorrect about so far is the fact that Twitter still exists. Somehow Elon Musk apparently didn't already turn this platform into X at any point. Oh, and also there's the old YouTube logo.
Give me your phone. Go ahead. Rare earth elements. Whole fucking world runs on this. Who controls all of it? China. Jeez. So while corporate America is kissing China's ass.
Now the mysterious Cortes Dia social network has crowdsourced simultaneous protests in both Iran and North Korea. Never seen in public, who really is the leader of Cortes Dia? He's known only as Odysseus.
Odysseus? My ass.
But I mean, it's like everything else is pretty on the nose. Yeah, that one's true. Oh God, yeah, you're right. That one's happening in real life too. That's crazy.
It really is about supply chain.
Oh, that's another one. Yeah, that's actually. Oh, LA's in shambles. Oh, they got that right as well. Okay, instead of this, maybe we should start with what Black Ops 2 didn't get right. Like I said, there's Twitter. That's it. But in all seriousness, it's undeniable that Treyarch accurately and correctly predicted the future to an eerie degree with Black Ops 2. I mean, by and large, they got the trajectory of the world correct and even many major literal events. Some things are questionable, sure, and just obviously fiction, but for the most part, it's quite impressive how well Black Ops 2 aged from a prediction and visionary standpoint. Treyarch had a ton of outside consultants who specialize in this kind of stuff to help them make the game in order to be authentic. And that was really important to the original Black Ops team, was to convey and capture authenticity in everything they do, which I think is a really commendable goal to achieve as a creative and artist for your game. Now, I could sit here and go over in painful detail all of the ways that Black Ops 2 accurately predicted the future, but that's not really the point of this video exactly. All of the real-world events and accuracy of them are honestly amazing, and they're impressive, and they absolutely are worth noting, but beneath the surface level similarities and details lies the hidden core of what made those predictions possible, and also why Black Ops 2 as a video game is still relevant and will truly never die.
I will see you 1 year from now.
The crux of why this video exists is twofold. Firstly, because it currently is 2025, and we're as close as we are where the game is going to be in real life, and in some ways that's kind of a neat time capsule to commemorate this game. And also, out of all of the classic Call of Duty games, BO2 is still the one that I end up thinking about the most, and I would argue is still by far the most culturally relevant of the classics as well, and not just for the reasons we discussed. Call of Duty Black Ops 7 got revealed very recently, and if there's anything that you take away from the marketing of that game, it's the fact that they're clearly trying to invoke the imagery, themes, concepts, style, and even subject material as Black Ops 2. I mean, the game is literally a Black Ops 2 sequel, which by definition I guess would make that game Black Ops 3 2, but obviously based on everything they want to call back to the game that it draws from as much as possible, which would be BO2. And to be totally fair, I can understand why they'd want to do do this. Activision probably loves Black Ops 2 just as much as the community does, albeit for slightly different reasons, I'm sure, but they're clearly interested in that. But what I'm interested in here is figuring out why exactly this game aged so well, and despite it being 13 years old, is a video game that, in my honest opinion, will never truly die or fade into obscurity, ever. There's something truly special going on here, and it's lightning in a console. In fact, I made a video 3 years ago when I started to feel this way about Black Ops 2, when I felt like there was something different and timeless about this one, and it seems like that video resonated with a lot of people. And I'm also making this video to honor Black Ops 2 myself, as I look back on that older video I made, and I'm not really happy with how that one turned out now. Just given that I've grown so much as a creator, I feel like I wanted to remake that video into the vision that I had for it now, plus the added perspective of an extra 3 years. And not to mention, there's been a lot of things that have happened in that 3 years time. I've been able to speak to some ex-developers on Black Ops 2. I've also had the honor of being able to go to Treyarch and see the ways in which the Treyarch studio operates these days, but most interestingly, I've spent hours digging through these leaked design documents of Black Ops 2. Apparently, a long time ago, something was physically stolen off of a hard drive at Treyarch, resulting in all of the design docs for Black Ops 2 leaking, and I've looked through all of it. Now, for the sake of privacy and respect, there's some things in those docs that just don't need to be talked about publicly, and as a lot of that stuff was never meant for our eyes to begin with, but what I will say is that I feel like I now have a very good idea of not only my opinion on the game, but also where Treyarch's collective head was at during the time and development and life cycle of Black Ops 2, and what their thoughts on a lot of pillars and aspects of the game were, which is a really interesting topic because we don't typically get to see the internal thoughts of the developer on their own product, but in this case, we do. Essentially, I know their opinions on a lot of the development aspects, and as much as I truly believe that Black Ops 2 is a timeless classic of a Call of Duty game, that doesn't mean that all was smooth sailing or even that Treyarch was necessarily happy with every aspect of their product. But what's curious is that Black Ops 2 never got the sequel that most fans wanted. I mean, if you've seen any of my other videos on these games, yes, Black Ops 3 technically does tie into the universe and is canon, but as you know, it's so far removed that it may as well be its own standalone story. The literal and immediate events of Call of Duty Black Ops 2 never exactly got a continuation, so in many ways, I can understand why Treyarch would choose to pursue this option for Black Ops 7, but what I'm a little bit unsure about is if Treyarch in its current form and Raven Software are the right fellas for the job. I mean, if the campaign is handled by Raven, that's a whole other discussion for this video, but I'm mostly interested in the fact that virtually none of the original minds and team for Black Ops 2, or just honestly the Black Ops story, are there anymore. I mean, let's take a look at some of the masterminds responsible for the legacy of the original Black Ops stories. So we got Dave Anthony. You know, he pretty much spawned Black Ops. He's gone. We also had Jason Blundell, also gone. We have David Goyer, who the guy who not only wrote a bunch of superhero movies, but also co-wrote Black Ops 2. Yeah, that lad is nowhere to be seen. We also have David Vonderhaar, you know, the guy whose legendary multiplayer design created this experience that we know and love. Yeah, he's just enjoying life in the desert, and honestly, I love that for him. Dan Bunting, another multiplayer guy, is gone. Miles Leslie, he's actually still there. Kevin Drew is also still at Treyarch, and Kevin Drew is great, by the way, but other guys like Jay Purrier, gone. Mark Lamia, gone. Mark Gordon, he might still be there. I actually don't remember. But anyways, my point is many of the original people that made your favorite games, these classic Call of Duty titles, are just simply not there anymore. You know, the voice actors, writers, producers that made that experience so special have just either moved on to other projects or have simply retired at this point. Scrolling through the credits of Black Ops 2, it's like that scene where Mr. Incredible is scrolling through all of the terminated superheroes on the computer. I said in my Black Ops 6 review that the game as a whole I think is pretty solid, but my biggest issue, or one of them at least, is that the single player campaign, it feels like an imitation of Black Ops. Like, it feels that a studio that understands the literal events, the timeline, and the characters of it, but they don't understand that Black Ops is more than the literal happenings. It's the spirit, and it's more about the art of pushing the boundaries of storytelling, which was really important to people like Mark Lamia and Dave Anthony Anthony and Jason Blundell.
I think the thing that's going to surprise people the most about Call of Duty Black Ops 2 is just how much we are pushing it, pushing the boundaries of Call of Duty.
Kind of the success of Call of Duty each year, there's a new one comes out and it smashes the record of the previous one. How long do you think that can go on for? Do you have to plateau at some point?
I don't believe so, because I think, when we started with the franchise, there was different kind of teams developing it, but as we started, there was such an idea of, this is COD, and that would be a little bit sacred. But as time's gone on, we've kind of innovated and changed the style, and as Treyarch, we now have a certain flair and taste about our products that allows us, and with other teams, allows them to kind of go in different directions. And with this title, I feel like we've just started on the road to kind of explore different avenues in gameplay.
I mean, he was right about that, at least, had he known that there was going to be 5 more Black Ops games at this point. And that's exactly what Black Ops 2 did at its core. That's why it was boundary pushing, visionary, and what we might consider now to be timeless. It was pushing the market and the brand of Call of Duty in new directions, where, while I'm still excited for Black Ops 7 in a lot of ways, after this one, I honestly think it's time to retire the Black Ops brand. Like I said, there's hardly anyone from the original Black Ops team left, and Black Ops is very old Treyarch, and that era, in my opinion, has just simply passed. I think that new Treyarch needs to find their footing in something totally novel, and I believe they can do it, because I know that new Treyarch is capable of amazing things in their own right. I just think that it's time for them to let go of the legacy that made them, and that's scary for them, I'm sure, because what is Treyarch without Black Ops? But at the same time, they clearly need to take a step in their own fresh direction with this brand new team, bravely into the future and take some risks. That was always the Treyarch spirit right there.
Taking risks, let me just say that. And if there's any one theme, as we jump around my career here, if there's one theme that kind of runs through here, is I feel these positions are positions, being journalism or game creation, it's incumbent on us to take risks, and if we got into this position, which I'm sure there's many people who want to be in the positions we're in.
Sure.
It's incumbent on us to take the risks and to push the line. Because if you're not going to, who is going to? And it's like, that means going to the edge, right? And that was always very important for me, which was what we're doing. So that was always very important for me, which was like taking those risks and pushing it. Right?
Anyways, despite the fact that hardly anyone from the original Black Ops days is still left at Treyarch, I do still think that this new team is capable of paving their own direction moving forward. I feel like it's time to hang up the jersey after Black Ops 7. What's next after this? Like, seriously, are they going to do Black Ops 8? That's crazy, but I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility, but Treyarch was never known as the studio to play it safe whatsoever. In fact, they built their brand on it. That's why COD Zombies exists in the first place, for example. It's that risk-taking. But the point is that clearly there was something magical and special in the air that led to the creation of Black Ops 2. And as much as I'm rooting for Black Ops 7 to be good, I don't think that anything's ever gonna quite strike the same energy as BO2 did, especially with how much Black Ops 7 wants to rely on the legacy of this game. But the real question is, why is this game so legendary? Why does virtually the entire Call of Duty community hold Black Ops 2 in such high favor? You could say that it is purely nostalgia speaking, but I would disagree with that, as even games like MW3 or Ghost that came out around a similar time frame, while you may have personally enjoyed these games, they're clearly not standing in the cultural foreground nearly as much. But even when I think about it, in the following years after Black Ops 2's release with Ghosts and even Advanced Warfare, I still found myself coming back to Black Ops 2 time and again, as did the majority of my friends who ended up back on BO2 despite newer Call of Duty games releasing. There's always been this magnetism to Black Ops 2, whether it was in its prime a few years after release or well over a decade to where we are now. But what I've realized is that Black Ops 2 is not a perfect game at all, but in fact some of its biggest flaws ended up being its strength in the long run. Mark Lamia said in an interview that Black Ops 2 is kind of 3 different games in one, which is a stark contrast to Call of Duty's modern direction, in which they make every attempt to homogenize the modes and make the experience much more unified across the board. Black Ops 2 is kind of all over the place in good and bad ways, but ultimately whatever they did clearly worked out. So to understand the legacy of this game, we are going to need to examine it in a bit more detail, starting with the very foundation of the game, the unforgettable single-player campaign. When it comes to storytelling in Black Ops games, the original trilogy is kind of what you want to see from Treyarch. The original Black Ops game was genuinely groundbreaking when it comes to the clever nature of its storytelling that absolutely set the precedent for what Black Ops was, and honestly, what Treyarch's identity was going forward. Black Ops 2 would carry that legacy on, but would innovate further and not just simply do what they did in Black Ops 1 again, but would genuinely push the line with Black Ops 2, its multiple endings, its very real and gritty moments, and overall the game design choices that were made reflect a campaign that's very heavy on personal choice in the way that you interact with that story. And all of the different endings you can get in Black Ops 2 were interesting in their own right, and now Call of Duty has made one ending of this game canon, which we will talk about, but Black Ops 3 on the other hand, this is the one that I always say doesn't really work, and Treyarch also admit that this one wasn't working. They had to throw something together, so according to Jason Blundell, they just went and tried something insane. And as much as the Black Ops 3 campaign is very flawed, I do think that it's actually the most interesting, at least for me. It's definitely more interesting than appears on the surface, but despite that, they were all doing something incredibly different, where I don't really feel that's the case in modern Treyarch, right? With Cold War, I think it's a very solid campaign, but it's safe. Black Ops 6, as I mentioned, more than anything feels like an imitation of Black Ops, and Black Ops 7, I'm sort of worried that it's going to feel similar, and while it is an open world campaign, that does lead it to potentially being something more along the lines of Black Ops 3, but I do think that it's going to try to hold more to the canon of the established Black Ops timeline. And while I'm here, you guys seem to like when I make predictions about what's going to happen in the next Call of Duty game before it comes out, so just mark my words of when this video comes out. I think what's going to happen in Black Ops 7 is the Guild of Avalon is eventually going to become Coalescence from Black Ops 3. I guarantee you there's a connection there, and the Guild is somehow, some way, going to end up becoming Coalescence for the Black Ops 3 story, but that's all I'm going to say. But I personally just don't see them pushing the envelope in any ways the same that the original Black Ops team did with this trilogy. That being said, Black Ops 2 story is quite fascinating because you can't really talk about the story in one direct way. I mean, I guess you can now because there's one canon ending, but that wasn't the intention from the start. They just made Black Ops, the original one, as that just happened to be the game they want to make, and this ended up being the sequel, but at that time, there was not this giant, novel of established Call of Duty canon that they have to sort of color in the lines with. They were able just to think freely and make any story they wanted to tell, and that's why Black Ops 2 feels so fresh and novel, is because they were genuinely paving new ground, which is also why I think Treyarch in the future should go off and do their own thing, because the Black Ops universe now is so constrained and they have to work within all of these boundaries of the other games and stuff like that, where I feel like that can stifle creativity, whereas they went in their own direction and made a brand new universe, they could do literally whatever they want, which was the original spirit of Black Ops and specifically this game. But anyways, that's besides the point. The themes, concepts, and structure of BO2's campaign is much more interesting to me. I do think that this campaign is far different than many other Call of Duty ones, because now I think modern COD has gotten in a campaign formula where it's mission followed by cinematic cutscene, mission, cinematic cutscene, rinse and repeat, where the structure of this is a bit more nuanced. Firstly, you have a couple of main missions in which nothing really too different happens, right? You can't make any different choices, but at a certain point in the game, depending on what you do, or maybe things that you do or don't find, or people that you choose to kill or let live, this will fundamentally determine the ultimate outcome and branching pathways of the game. But also, every once in a while, there are something called strike missions, which is something they added to this one that I personally, in retrospect, I don't love the strike missions from a gameplay perspective. I do think they're interesting in the way that they're integrated, as you have to do them to get the, what you might call the best possible ending. But the gameplay of the strike missions are like a cross between an RTS game and FPS, where you command these different units and squads and command them to do a variety of objectives. Maybe you have to defend a certain area, or maybe you need to kill or capture a certain VIP, and you can do it by either manning the soldiers, or you can even use some of the different robots and technological weapons that are scattered throughout the battlefield. Clearly, these are a departure from the mainstay linear missions that are meant for big storyline purposes, but they are optional at the end of the day. You don't necessarily have to do all of these strike missions, but they are experimental, and I applaud Treyarch for at least trying them. I don't really think the RTS formula works super well in a Call of Duty game, and we haven't really seen them attempt that since, but you know, it's interesting that they at least tried it in this game, even if it didn't really work out so well. But I think the main draw to the Black Ops 2 campaign, other than its actual story, is the way that it's told, and it's very unique because Black Ops 2 is told through two different time periods. You have the era of time that is essentially just after the events of Black Ops 1, so in a way, this is kind of a direct sequel to BO1 because you have these missions taking place in the past that explains a little bit more with what happened with Frank Woods and Mason in particular. And maybe this doesn't sound too crazy or impressive on first glance, but when you look at it and think about it, this means that Treyarch had to develop totally unique assets for not only the future elements of their game, but also the past. Call of Duty games now tend to focus on one time period, but also that means they make weaponry and assets that are made for that specific era, and they are able to use that kind of across the board, where in Black Ops 2, they had to put in the extra effort to make all of these older weapons and older set pieces in the missions just for these couple of levels to tell the story. I just think it's commendable how much effort they put into that aspect alone that I really appreciated on a recent playthrough. And I mentioned this before because I believe it to be very true. One of the other advantages to telling the story like this is that it keeps it both thematically and visually interesting the entire time. There's not a single dull moment in this campaign. There's not any time where it gets stale or where it's dragging on a little bit too long, or the time period you're in is just, you know, being a bit too much. They have almost a perfect balance of cutting to the past stuff and then going back to the future and somehow weaving that all in a way that makes sense, which is a really difficult way to tell a story, but they did manage to pull it off. And if you want to talk about characters, I will die on this hill that Black Ops 2 still has the best protagonist as well as main antagonist. They're so well written, incredibly well acted, and they really sell their performance. Unfortunately, in Black Ops 7, we're going to have a different David Mason, and also Menendez is going to be different because, sadly, the original voice actor of Menendez in Black Ops 2 passed away a couple of years ago. And I'm not really sure how I feel personally about having such an iconic character recast that way, but I'm also a little bit more worried about how they're going to handle the writing of the character, given that what we saw they did with Makarov in the Modern Warfare series. I really feel like the new Makarov was just such a far cry from the original for so many subtle and not so subtle reasons that I'm actually terrified that they might do the same thing to Menendez. And while I was sitting here thinking about how good Menendez is, how amazing he is as a Call of Duty antagonist, and how great his story was in this game, my question then becomes, do we actually really need a sequel to this game exactly? I mean, their stories were kind of told in Black Ops 2, and I'm trying to think about how they could make another game with these characters that is still just as compelling as this one, because clearly that's going to be the main conflict of that game, but I'm also like, maybe their stories were best told here. I'm not sure, that is still yet to be seen, but all I can say is that both David Mason and Menendez are a perfect match for each other in Black Ops 2. Menendez's motivations are complicated, yet simple enough that to some degree you can empathize with them. It's a complicated and dark story of revenge where Menendez's parents were killed by the US, leading to a hatred for the United States military, and that eventually led to him torturing Frank Woods, and Woods wanting to get revenge on Menendez ended up becoming a disaster in which Menendez's sister would be killed. And for this, Menendez doesn't want to kill Woods, or even David Mason for that matter. He simply wants them to suffer with him, leading to probably the most iconic mission in the entire Black Ops 2 campaign, but also maybe the most iconic mission in Call of Duty, period. There's not a ton of video game moments that stuck with me so much that I can recount the dialogue just from my brain, and I can see each and every single moment, but this mission is one of them, and it's easily the linchpin of the Black Ops 2 campaign in general. Menendez essentially hijacks and harnesses the world's technology to cripple it, more or less, and his new uprising, Cortes Die, is going to be essentially the New World Order, or at least that's his vision for it. Menendez is terrifying because he's also not afraid at all of death. There's so many moments where you have the upper hand, yet he remains fearless. And also something we don't really get in Call of Duty is playing as the perspective of the main villain. Again, this is one of the most powerful missions in the game because you're forced to witness Frank Woods, his own horrible act, and play from the perspective and put yourself in the shoes of the main antagonist. And to some degree, you can actually empathize with him, which leads to a lot of complicated feelings throughout the campaign. Now, as there are multiple endings, of course, all of the arcs of the characters, including David Mason, but also Frank Woods, Alex Mason even, and Menendez are all sort of up to you. There are a lot of cool moments and subtleties about what you tend to do or choices you make in certain missions. Harper might accidentally get his face burnt in this mission, which leads to a different outcome when you go to the resort, or you can, shoot Alex Mason in the leg instead of the head, leading to a non-lethal shot, and he's still alive at the end of the game. Again, many of these endings are not canon anymore, apparently, but the one that is canon is that Alex Mason is actually dead. Harper is also dead. But what I noticed on a recent playthrough is that the Black Ops 2 campaign is very tightly written and it's to the point, and there's not much fluff to speak of. One of my biggest criticisms of the Cold War campaign and even Black Ops 6 was that there's just a whole lot of yapping essentially about nothing, where in Black Ops 2 it stays very on the rails, the game gets going, and it never really stops until the end. And there's never any moments where you feel like it's dragging on or you're too bored. Again, part of that is because the cutting back and forth between the past and the future, but also it's just that the writing and the mission structure in particular are both very clever and smart, and so it gets the game going in a way that sets the tone brilliantly.
6/19. Oh my God, June 19th. That's tomorrow.
And also, not to mention, one of my favorite things about the older Call of Duty experiences was the fact that in many of the, what I'm going to call transitory moments in the game, right? These moments where story exposition is being told or something is happening with characters, typically in modern COD, this is just done over with these like cinematics, right? That you just sit down and watch. But in many of the older Call of Duty games, and especially in Black Ops 2, many of these moments still feature you sort of in control, and at least in the first-person perspective in the game, which I think keeps you much more engaged than these cinematic cutscenes. Like, I can just see if they just straight up remade Black Ops 2 during the campaign, like a moment like this where you're walking around to, this guy's backyard to talk with him about the mission, this would just be a cinematic. Or this moment where you're talking with Menendez and trying to decide whether you should kill Harper or not. Like, all of these would just be cinematics at this point, where, being in the first-person perspective in the game is far more immersive, in my opinion, than just watching the, albeit very pretty, but still kind of disconnected cinematic movies. If you want the player to feel immersed, I think this is a much better approach, and it's these like smaller, intimate moments that is away from the point-and-shoot gameplay that really makes you connect with the story and the characters in a much more personal and emotional way. It's something we haven't really seen in Call of Duty since, honestly, like Infinite Warfare. Now, I understand COD wants to make their campaigns cinematic. I totally understand the impact and importance of cutscenes as well. I'm not saying that they shouldn't have them, but they need to be used sparingly and for a purpose. Like in Black Ops 2, we have cutscenes for these moments between Section and Frank Woods, and I think it's totally fine to have, a cinematic here. It makes sense for the story that's being delivered, but I also think it makes sense to keep the player in the perspective during a moment like this, or even this one. I cannot even begin to describe the difference in the level of immersion that I felt when playing the Black Ops 6 campaign and then recently going back to play Black Ops 2. And if you have the means to be able to do so, if you can, I recommend doing the same thing, because I would wager that most people are going to feel more engrossed and immersed in Black Ops 2's campaign, despite it technically not looking as good as some of the newer Call of Duties. I don't think that matters as much as if the storytelling is impeccable. But let's put the story away for a second and talk a little bit about gameplay. Now, I will admit this, I think that the gameplay systems and the way that that levels are designed now in modern Call of Duty has objectively gotten better. I'm just going to be honest, I loved the Black Ops 6 campaign purely from a gameplay perspective. There are a lot of neat additions that they made to make the levels feel a little bit more engaging than just simply point and shoot all the time. The, actual NPC AI has gotten a lot more sophisticated. There's more intricacies to the levels, and from a gameplay perspective, like Black Ops 2 does feel a little bit dated in that aspect, or at least quaint in comparison. That might be a better word, but that's not necessarily their fault, and it also doesn't take away from the fun that you can experience. Obviously, Black Ops 2 was made on far older technology than modern Call of Duty gets made on, but also just the level techniques and things that they've added to make the experience more engaging overall has certainly improved in modern games. But I still find the gameplay of Black Ops 2 to be fairly engaging, and again, I like the fact that you have different types of technology depending on which era you're playing, and also you have a create a class system so that you can kind of customize what you bring into a level. Now, ultimately, it doesn't really matter what you bring in a level, it's honestly preference at the end of the day, but there are neat things to experiment with as you play, and you can replay the game and unlock different weapons that you didn't otherwise have access to your first time around, which adds, a little bit of incentive to play the game again and perhaps get a different ending. And I just always go back to thinking about this, right? Like, imagine how good a Call of Duty game would be if it had the boundary-pushing storytelling of an original Black Ops game married and coupled with the more interesting and developed gameplay systems of modern Call of Duty campaigns. If you could put those two things together, you could make something incredibly special, but it's like we've kind of traded off one for the other. We have better gameplay, but I would argue less interesting stories, where back in the day, we had amazing stories with much more simple gameplay. But speaking of edge, risk, and boundary pushing, Treyarch didn't have a problem with including many real-life figures like Joseph Zavimbi or Manuel Noriega, who weren't exactly happy about their portrayals and ended up suing Activision as a result, but ultimately this went nowhere and they still contributed to the art that the game was. One of my biggest criticisms of modern COD campaigns is that they've almost entirely lost their razor edge when it comes to, the actual subject material, but also in the way that they portray some of these things. Like, this is the edge that I'm talking about. This mission is something that will forever be burned into most people's brains. And I get why, they don't take as much risk because the modern climate is much tougher on stuff like that. But once again, that was the identity that Treyarch founded itself upon initially. The risk and pushing right up to the line was what made them so great. The story is also a reflection on how well this aged from a narrative and gameplay perspective too. Every single moment is dripping with personality. If Black Ops 2 has anything at all, it's an identity, and this game knows what it wants to be, and every single choice and decision made is in service of that goal. Some might say that modern COD suffers from an identity crisis in recent years, and maybe there's some merit to that, but Black Ops 2 had no problem with conveying exactly what it was and what it stands for, and this game's multiple endings and branching pathways allow you to develop a very personal and emotional connection with the characters and what's happening in this world. And it's that very emotional connection that Treyarch now is counting on you to care about for Black Ops 7. And while I am interested to see what they're going to do and how they're going to handle this in Black Ops 7, I am a little bit worried that the nuances and themes of this campaign are not going to quite translate into this next title. But maybe I'm wrong, and perhaps Black Ops 7 will end up being just as visionary and well-aged in time as BO2, but that remains to be seen. For now, I still believe that Black Ops 2 will remain as one of the most masterfully told stories in gaming and one of the most visionary and well-crafted experiences out there, and I have a hard time imagining that that's going to be outdone very easily. What will a campaign featuring all of the characters and brilliant material written by people who, for the most part, aren't even at Treyarch anymore, be able to do with this story? Whatever happens, I don't think it will ever change the fact that Black Ops 2's campaign is iconic and will be forever, but it stretches even beyond that because this single player laid the foundation for what might also be one of the most innovative and fun multiplayer experiences of all time that I think is responsible for catapulting Call of Duty into the main stage. The multiplayer of Call of Duty Black Ops 2 is no longer able to be experienced in the way that many of us had it on console back in the day. Like that classic Premier MP experience that it was known for, you really can't play anymore. I mean, you can, but most console lobbies are overrun by hackers or just kind of straight up dead. The only way to legitimately play anything close to the vanilla Black Ops 2 experience is on PC playing on a client called Plutonium, and even then, there are a little bit of differences between the original experience and this one. However, by and large, you can have that MP experience again that you did all of those years ago when the game first came out, and I have to say, I've been playing a lot of Plutonium recently, and Black Ops 2 multiplayer is so incredibly fun that I remember why I fell in love with this series to begin with, and so much so that Black Ops 2 MP was actually the reason that I started my YouTube channel to begin with. I fell in love with this game so much that it inspired me to start making content, and there's absolutely no way that I would be here making this video right now or even have a channel if it was not for this game. Now, there's an attribute to this multiplayer that I still feel like is relevant in modern Call of Duty, and that's the map design differences between Treyarch and Infinity Ward in particular, but especially during these times, Infinity Ward was much more known for their open-ended level structure where not all maps were symmetrical or even identical. Treyarch, on the other hand, went for much more structured three-lane style maps where each lane kind of served a different purpose and had different lengths of sightlines, and all of their maps were more or less built around this philosophy. Yeah, and maybe that's changed a little bit in recent years, but I still feel like overall Infinity Ward is focusing on more asymmetrical open-ended maps, where Treyarch tends to focus on a bit more structured arcadey three-lane maps. Treyarch was also slowly but surely figuring out exactly what their identity with multiplayer is, because let's be honest, they were always kind of trailing Infinity Ward. World at War's multiplayer was solid, but let's be honest, it was pretty much a direct copy of COD 4, just in a completely different setting. They started to find their identity with Black Ops 1, but I believe that it would be Black Ops 2 that would absolutely crystallize their identity and catalyze the formula specifically for Treyarch. And what I find really fascinating is that many of the unique features found in Black Ops 2's multiplayer became core staples of the MP experience, but also some features that we will unfortunately probably never see again. For example, the wildcard system that allowed you to select a different perk on top of the 3 standard ones you get for your class was introduced here, but most importantly, score streaks. You know, Call of Duty traditionally only had a hard kill streak system, but Treyarch intelligently wanted to also reward objective players and make stuff like capturing flags or getting assists still worth something in the grand scheme of things of earning your streaks, and score streaks would completely change the game. And now that some time has passed and we can look back on these a bit more retrospectively, I can say that Black Ops 2 has my favorite score streaks in the entire Call of Duty franchise, period. Yes, even more so than stuff like the original MW2. Those streaks are awesome and they are fun, but let's be honest, people generally only run like the big 3, right? You run your Harrier, Chopper Gunner, and Nuke. Where in Black Ops 2, there's like almost everything viable, or at least a lot of things are fun, even just from a sandbox perspective. Not all of them are just like lethal helicopters, right? You can get stuff like a Guardian, and it was not the most lethal thing in the world, but obviously it could be used very tactically and to shut off choke points and stuff like that. You could also have the RCXD, which is perhaps Treyarch's most iconic form of this, but the point is that the identity of Black Ops 2 that they were solidifying was a much more sandboxy approach to the Call of Duty arcade experience as opposed to Infinity Ward, and I think that's where they really found their footing here. I mean, when you think about it, so many YouTube channels at the time were built off of Call of Duty multiplayer trolling videos, and I feel like we all can look back and say that Black Ops 2 was the game that was most cut out for that sort of thing. It made for the best content because they really had a sandbox approach to when designing this multiplayer. And also the map design, man, the more I've been playing Plutonium, I just have a newfound appreciation for Black Ops 2's maps. And, you know, they have remastered many of these for more modern experiences in Black Ops 6 or even in Cold War, and they are good, you know, and some of the remakes are actually a few of the best in those respective games, but also at the same time, I think it just goes to show how masterfully crafted a lot of these maps were, and they were built specifically with Black Ops 2 systems in mind. This was before we had any kind of wall running or advanced movement or sliding or anything like that, and while you might say that that makes the game feel a little bit dated or clunky now, I don't think it does, because the base player movement speed is higher than you probably remember for these older games, and also the maps are in the proper context of the game that they were made for. As much as I love stuff like Nuketown and Black Ops 6, it's very clear when I play it that we were not meant to be moving around the map in the way that we are now. They have kind of redesigned the map to be more contextual for that game's movement, but still you can tell that in some of these original Call of Duty games, that's what it was made for fundamentally, and that's where it plays best. But on top of the core gameplay loop being fantastic, and the weapon sandbox and create a class and score streaks being very friendly to sandbox style gameplay that was quite different from Infinity Ward at that time, the other thing that Black Ops 2 was able to set itself apart with was its community features, which unfortunately I am still mourning the loss of. Stuff like theater mode, well, for a while that was gone, but they've recently brought it back for Black Ops 6. But also, this is where League Play was born, which a lot of the Call of Duty community still considers to be the best implementation of a ranked mode or competitive COD that's built into the game itself. And of course, there was custom matches to play with your friends. There was even a built-in video editor that you could use to post to a community tab in the game, or you could even straight upload it to YouTube, which is what I did for my first ever videos here on this platform. But also, the thing that I feel like I miss most was an emblem editor. I mean, we haven't had an emblem editor as a feature since Black Ops 4, and I can understand why they got rid of it. It is unfortunate because I love that feature. It's one of my favorite, in fact, and there are some people in this community that are so talented at making art through the emblem editor that it became a whole sub-community on its own, which was essentially eviscerated overnight with the removal of the emblem editor. I would spend so much time making emblems in every single game that had it, and it was one of those things that helped you get personally attached to your weapons and also to the game at large. But I can also understand why they removed it. And as I play more Plutonium, I kind of do recognize that the community just can't really handle a feature like that these days. And look, I'm not here to police what people make for their emblems, but at the same time, some people just begin a little too crazy with it, and I can understand why this feature was removed. It was also probably because they were able to kind of monetize the system by making, you know, paid emblems inside of bundles, and I feel like the best implementation of this was actually Infinite Warfare, which had these pre-packaged emblems that you could either earn or buy, but they also had an emblem editor in case you wanted to make a custom one. In a perfect world, that's the ideal scenario, I think, but at this point in time, it's quite unlikely that we're ever going to see the emblem editor again. It's most likely it was born in Black Ops 1 and died in Black Ops 4, never to be seen again. In addition to its maps, BO2 also has fantastic weapon design, from its animations to its looks, the sounds, the camos, etc. The weapons are iconic, and I feel like a lot of you would agree that some of your favorite weapons from the Call of Duty series are probably found in Black Ops 2. I know that's the case for me, and many of you watching this, I'm sure. But speaking of camos, not only were the base camos pretty solid, and stuff like gold and diamond were heavily sought after in this game, but also the store actually featured microtransactions. The camos in this game that you could buy individually that would go on any weapon could be purchased for literally $2. That is genuinely unheard of these days. $2 for a camo that you can wear on any weapon in the game without restrictions is just not going to happen anymore. Now, it is worth noting that Black Ops 2 was still in the era of paid DLC map packs, so that is worth considering, whereas we get free updates with Call of Duty now throughout the year. Everybody gets all the map packs for free, etc. But the other thing is that in modern Call of Duty, with these bundles, I'm not even really sure if these can be classified as microtransactions anymore. This game is kind of where it started, and yeah, $2 to $5 for a camo, either in BO2 or Ghost, yeah, you could consider that a microtransaction, but in modern Call of Duty, if you're spending $40 on a bundle like this, which is basically like half the price of the game, or even more so, could it even be considered micro at that point? I mean, that's a lot of money, man, and for what? And back in the day, what, if you bought every map pack, you would spend $50 throughout the entire year to get all of the expansions for the game, and $50 is still a lot of money, but at the same time, you're getting 4 map pack expansions with it, and you're not just buying like a bundle with a weapon skin and an emblem and a charm or something like that. You could spend, you know, your $15 on map packs, and then maybe a couple of $2 transactions here and there for a few camos you like, and that wasn't that insane. point is, I think this was an incredibly consumer-friendly model they had in Black Ops 2. Not to mention the actual transactions you could buy, these cosmetics, they weren't game-altering in the sense that, like, look at these skins in some recent COD games. It's like, bro, what exactly is this game doing anymore? In Black Ops 2, you couldn't actually change your player model character at all, so at least the look of those always remained the same, but you did have the option to change your weapon skins, and yeah, some of them were a little bit out there, but I still don't think they outright broke the immersion. They were fun, and they were interesting, but the game was still able to maintain its identity throughout the entire year. I think a big part of that is not allowing people to change their character model. Now, with all of that in mind, Black Ops 2 multiplayer wasn't perfect. You can even go back on old internet forums and hear people complaining about Black Ops 2 and the time that it was out and during its prime, but it was mostly stuff like lag compensation, snipers being overpowered, which eventually the DSR would get nerfed, but not only that, but some of the maps are still stinky. I don't care how much time passes, Aftermath is not and will never be a good multiplayer map. Some of the DLC maps for Black Ops 2 are a little bit hit or miss as well. There are some bangers like Studio, that's a fantastic one, but there are some maps that just aren't great in the DLC. But by and large, I do think that multiplayer in Black Ops 2 got the COD formula correct, and I really do think that this is kind of responsible for people getting hooked on this game. But at the same time, I don't think we're ever going to get an experience quite like this again, mainly because, just like the campaign, a lot of the original masterminds that are responsible for this multiplayer specifically and the innovation that came forth from it are no longer at Treyarch, like Tony Flame and David Vonderhaar. Those guys aren't at Treyarch and haven't been for quite some time. But I can confidently answer the question now that Black Ops 2 multiplayer is more than just its nostalgia. This game is solid, and it's one of Treyarch's best-in-class multiplayers ever. In fact, it's just as fun now as it was back in the day. I'm going to be very curious to see what Black Ops 7 does to handle its multiplayer in the future, and if they're going to try to emulate Black Ops 2 as they are clearly doing with the campaign. That is to be seen, but as I said, no matter what happens, that will never take away from the legacy that Black Ops 2 paved for itself. The discussion around Black Ops 2 Zombies maps just got a lot more interesting because, identically to the campaign where they're invoking the imagery from Black Ops 2, it's pretty clear that in Black Ops 7, they're going after what you might call remakes or remasters of some of these original maps in BO2, namely Transit or even Mob of the Dead. And I'm very curious how they're going to handle this because the modern COD Zombies formula has very much homogenized the gameplay and its systems, which in some ways has been good, but in some ways has also taken away from the unique identity and charm of each individual map. And what I mean is, like, if you play Black Ops 6, a lot of the maps play identically, right? You have the same weapon sandbox, you have the same crafting table, armors on every map, you've got the same gobblegum, perks, augments, basic systems like that. Now, you do have some unique things on maps like Easter eggs or even some enemy types, but at the same time, you get what I'm saying, that the gameplay has become much more homogenized, where in Black Ops 2, that was the antithesis of that. Transit is so different to something like Mob of the Dead or Origins that they might as well not even be on the same game, and this led to some extreme ups and downs for the Zombies formula in this game. Black Ops 2 Zombies had a very rough start, and that's not just my opinion. Like I said about those leaked design documents, I can see personal conversations internally at Treyarch, and Transit was not doing well, and it was not exactly what they wanted to make. I don't think that's a secret at this point. They had much bigger visions for it. They were held back by the hardware. There was a lot of different game modes and features and systems that they wanted to implement into that map that sadly never made it for one reason or another. Now, if you want to look at it from an optimistic viewpoint, you could say that the maybe Transit remaster coming in Black Ops 7 might be more accurate to what their original vision was for Black Ops 2. I would say for now, that's how I'm going to choose to look at this. I feel like best case scenario is Transit, that the way that it was supposed to play and the features that it was meant to have back in the day are now going to be finally realized with the upgrades and additions of new technology. That would be wonderful. But again, it does worry me that stuff like Mob of the Dead, if they do plan on bringing that back, are going to be quite different for many reasons. And in particular, one of the biggest things is that the voice actors are no longer available for that map. I mean, one of them has sadly passed away. There's been a lot of people, now that I think about it, in Black Ops 2 that participated in this original game that are no longer even with us. But as always, it could end up being like a Blood of the Dead thing where we're on Mob, but it's not the original crew. Maybe it's the Ether crew. So I suspect they'll do something like that. But, you know, the point is, the gameplay systems between Transit and Mob of the Dead cannot be understated about how different they really are. And that was kind of the charm of Black Ops 2, I think anyways. It had some extremely high highs and very low lows. Transit was not a good map, and it still isn't. Now, I think it's kind of unique that they're bringing it back for Black Ops 7, and they have an opportunity to make it much better, but at the same time, Transit is iconic for a lot of reasons. It is one of the most fun maps to play with your friends, and that is partly in design of its chaotic nature. It's almost set up to be that way, whereas Mob of the Dead and Origins, this is where Jason Blundell took over, and these maps are far more deliberate, they're structured, they have a goal for you in mind, they're more narrative oriented, where Zelensky maps, on the other hand, were a bit more chaotic and just about the survival. What's kind of interesting is that Buried, which is considered to be Zelensky's best map, is not even really his map, and this is confirmed by those documents I went through. This is actually a David Vonderhaar map, more or less. His original idea for Buried was much different than the one that you and I play, whereas the one that we got is after Vonderhaar took over and made a lot of systems on his own. But the point is, Black Ops 2 Zombies is legitimately all over the place, and what I think that the disadvantage is that most people are probably not going to like every map in the game. Again, you have a favorite map in Black Ops 2, whether it's Mob or Origins or even Buried, there's something for everybody, but the chances that you're going to like all of the maps equally are almost none, where contrast this to modern COD Zombies, where all of the maps are so similar from a systems perspective that it's much more likely that you're going to enjoy or at least understand the maps, you know, when you compare them side by side. Something like Shattered Veil is honestly not that different to Terminus when it comes to how you play it and what it features. BO2 Zombies had a lot of growing pains and trying to find itself as the year went on. That Zombies formula after Blundell took over would eventually be catalyzed in Black Ops 3, but you can see it start to work on itself here. They also tried a number of different game modes that, you know, one we actually saw very recently in Black Ops 6. This is where Grief was born. It was more of like a competitive survival mode, which I really like Black Ops 2 Grief. Black Ops 6 just plays so different to the point of the original mode was that I'm not even sure if it can be called the same thing. It's fun in its own right, but I don't know if it's really Grief in the traditional way. But also they tried something like Turned, where you play as the zombie. This mode was kind of silly and didn't really work in my opinion. It was just not the most enjoyable thing in the world, but it was an interesting, crazy idea that they at least tried. Whether it worked out or not, they were finding themselves, and the growing pains are right there on full display. BO2 Zombies wasn't working for a long time, in fact, that after Transit and Die Rise, that's when you saw the shift to a very different style of zombies. That's when Blundell would be tasked to take over, and I guess in the meantime, that's when also Vonderhaar was starting to take over on Buried. So what's also pretty crazy is that one of the biggest discussions in the zombies community now is like how zombies used to be and what we call classic zombies. And, you know, juxtaposing modern COD zombies with this is like people want to go back to the old days when it was more simple but more difficult and didn't hold your hand as much. What's kind of wild is that in these developer documents, they were having those exact discussions internally. There were arguments and discussions about whether Black Ops 2 Zombies was too inaccessible for the casual player. This was an active, you know, concern for them. Perfect example, stuff like permaperks. If you don't know what this system is, in all of these Zelensky maps in Black Ops 2, you could do a handful of like hidden challenges to get a certain perk. So for example, if you build enough barriers in a certain amount of time, you get these metal barriers that, you know, take longer for zombies to break down. You could get one that's like perma Juggernog or perma Tombstone or even perma PhD. These were awesome, but they didn't tell you exactly how to get them at all. The community would speculate and theorize about how these perma perks worked and how you could achieve or lose them, but the game would never outright tell you that. Some people thought that was a good idea, some people thought that was a bad idea. There was also discussion about how much they should be listening to the community. I feel like Zelensky in particular was very much in tune with listening to the zombies community, not only from what they want from out of the gameplay systems, but also the storyline. I've said this before that I feel like the original charm of some of the old zombie storyline was the fact fact that we felt like we were writing it alongside Treyarch. A lot of our theories and things that we would speculate about on forums would, in some smaller big ways, end up actually becoming real in future Zombies maps, where now it seems like they kind of have a story that they already know they're going to tell, and the community can speculate about it, but it's not really being actively shaped by them anymore. Where there were some developers that felt like they shouldn't listen to the community as much and that they should focus on their vision, and I think that there's a balance to be struck there. Both Jimmy Zielinski and Jason Blundell were cryptic in their own right, but in quite different ways. There would be some communication from Zielinski to the community, and in some cases which would, you know, kind of drive hype and mystique and mystery, but also like he would just straight up lie sometimes. Like, you know, there's this tweet where Zielinski was like, yeah, death is not the only ending in Transit, which had people in a frenzy back in the day, but now, you know, in 2025 we know is bullshit. And I think one of the best examples of the growing pains and confusion and kind of mysticism that Black Ops 2 almost unintentionally had was the nav card system. This is something that was Jimmy Zielinski's idea, and were these cards that were spread across maps that interconnected, linked to each other, and then eventually let you do this super Easter egg. These nav cards were fascinating to me, but one of the craziest things was that when Mob of the Dead came out, a map that was seemingly completely disconnected from the rest of the Zielinski story that was being told at that time, the nav cards appear in your HUD on this map, leading me to not know what to think. And the thing is, there's no good reason even now for the nav cards to be on this map. They don't do anything, but they had people speculating and wondering, and we just don't really have that in Zombies anymore. And I think a lot of that was honestly unintentional. And it's those kinds of clashing systems that I just don't see happening in Black Ops 7, for better or for worse. Again, it wasn't all good in Black Ops 2 because the first two maps of this game are stinkers. Transit and Die Rise were off to a really rough start, and while you might find some charm in these in their own right, they're not really good maps. Transit, I don't care how much time passes, is not a good map. Is it fun? Yes, it is, especially with friends. It's a very fun map, but fun does not equal good. One of the things that Black Ops 2 was very big on as far as features go were their buildables. You know, every single map featured buildables to some degree. Zielinski was much more freeform with these than Blundell, for example. Like in Mob of the Dead, you're building the Blundergat or the Acid Gats or something like that, or the Zombie Shield. You know, these have very specific uses. Where in Buried, you can build pretty much whatever the hell you want. You know, you have this head chopper, there's a guillotine, there's, you know, all sorts of weird stuff that may or may not even have a purpose, but you can build things, and that's the point. In Transit, you can do the same thing, but the problem with Black Ops 2, or one of the biggest problems, is in solo, you really can't carry more than one part at a time, leading to a lot of tedious gameplay. Now, obviously, these maps were mostly built with co-op in mind. One of the only exceptions to that is in solo play, you can carry all of the gas cans on Mob of the Dead without having to, you know, place them one at a time. And also, most notably, the Origins Easter egg was never actually intended to be completable solo. People just found out by happenstance that you were able to do it by yourself, but clearly, if you play the Black Ops 2 Origins Easter egg now, it's clear that it's not exactly designed for solo play. You have to do all four staffs. There's a lot of running around in that map, and while it's definitely doable and people have figured out how to optimize the hell out of it to pretty much make it a solo Easter egg, it wasn't intended to be soloable from the start. I mean, hell, you can even solo the Transit Easter egg, which people only figured out like 3 years ago or something. Like that was a total fluke that you can be able to do that one by yourself. It requires a crazy amount of luck to be able to do it, but you can actually solo the Transit Easter egg as well. But it's stuff like this that the intentional design was meant to be co-op, but it was also built to be so open-ended that people are now figuring out these insane tricks to either optimize these maps or play them in a fundamentally different way than they were ever built or intended to be. It's very interesting, and I think that's what gives Black Ops 2 much of its replayability. It's that it's not like overtuned or ironed out. One of my personal biggest issues with modern COD Zombies is the fact that it seems like they've gotten so good at making video games that a lot of the interesting, like what you might call the roughness around the edges, has been ironed out. I mean, when I think about Black Ops 3 and specifically compare it to Black Ops 6 with Gobblegum, because BO3 was built a lot more shoddy, like it just wasn't as refined or polished, there was a lot of crazy things you could do with Gobblegum in that game. You could freeze boss fights, right? Like you could do this insane stuff, all completely unintentional, by the way, or not exactly, chosen by the developer for that interaction to happen, but you could break the game game in very interesting ways, and players like the feeling that they're breaking the game, and that's why they reintroduced Gobblegum in Black Ops 6, but it's like they give you the illusion that you're breaking the game, but these are a lot more like ironed out, and you know, it's more controlled this time. You don't get that actual like game-breaking sense that you did in BO3, but the point with that is that's kind of the design philosophy of all of Black Ops 2. There's so much stuff that can happen in this game that you're not really sure if it's intentional or not, that it kind of makes it more interesting to go and explore these maps and dig deep and see what you can find. That it's that sort of thing that I feel is missing from modern zombies. Also, it's unfortunate, but it's just a sad truth, is that data mining is much easier to do now, and so, you know, whether a map has a side Easter egg or not can be figured out in like the first day or two, where I feel like side Easter eggs were getting discovered literally years later on some of these older maps, partly because of how those side Easter eggs were designed, but also because like data mining wasn't as easy to do or accessible, and people weren't able to dig through the code as efficiently, and so it left a lot more mystery to these maps, that something is still hidden that players haven't uncovered. That, on top of the open-ended, unintentional design, led to these maps' ultimately long lifespan and replayability, where that's kind of the reason why modern COD Zombies maps I don't feel are as replayable, because they are kind of over-tuned or over-designed in a way where once you've experienced what you're supposed to experience, there's really nothing else, and there's not a way to fundamentally play it different and break the map, making it a totally different experience. I've already made a bunch of videos micro-analyzing all of the Zombies maps in Black Ops 2. Transit and Die Rise are almost different video games when comparing them to stuff like Mob of the Dead or Origins, and in some ways this was Black Ops 2's biggest hurdle to overcome. You can just tell that Treyarch was really scrambling to try to get stuff to work during BO2 Zombies era, but at the same time, in retrospect, I think part of that ended up becoming its strength. I feel like there was something for everyone because of how all over the place the maps were. There was a good chance you were going to like at least one of them because of how different they all are, but each and every single map felt fresh and novel because they actually were. Learning how the afterlife system works was an entirely novel challenge that literally no amount of Transit or Die Rise experience could ever prepare you for. Contrast that with newer COD Zombies, where it's like if you've learned how to play one or two of the Black Ops 6 Zombies maps, then, you know, you're pretty much prepared for anything else they're going to throw at you in BO6, because it largely doesn't matter what the new map is. It's kind of the same systems, just on a different playing field. But in BO2, having to relearn the game each time a new map comes out on BO2 was certainly intimidating for some, but I also think that it led to a freshness that kept the game engaging its entire life. And not to mention, there were plans to have Zombies Chronicles maps on BO2. They were planning on remastering the World at War maps for this game, but it never ended up happening. But I can't even imagine what that would have done to BO2 if they had done it. But with stuff like Transit specifically, I don't see any way that a modern game developer can look at that map and not start ripping stuff apart and fixing things up and changing a lot of the elements of it. So for BO7, maybe they're able to turn one of the worst designed maps in COD Zombies into a good and also fun map experience. That's what I'm hopeful for anyways. That's best case scenario. But I think no matter what, BO7 is not going to have that roughness around the edges and growing pains that were just part and parcel of BO2. Having these chaotic, open-ended survival maps paired with these narrative-based, you know, focused, structured Jason Blundell maps is a duality that I don't think we're ever going to experience again. It was a really unique situation that I don't think could ever exactly be replicated, nor should it be necessarily. Black Ops 2 is really special to me because of its roughness. Not that BO7 Zombies can't or won't be good and fun, but I'm also accepting the fact that it's going to be different, and it can't really be Black Ops 2 again. The Zombies formula has just evolved past that point, and now all we can really do is appreciate the mistakes and the triumph and the legacy that was BO2 Zombies, while putting everything in its proper place, and to recognize that BO7 should be drawing from the best aspects of this experience to make something equally unforgettable but also different. No matter what happens, there will never be another game quite like Black Ops 2. It was made under incredibly unique circumstances and by people who mostly aren't even at the studio that's making Black Ops these days anymore. BO2 was a lot of things: visionary, well-crafted, innovative, experimental, strange, fascinating, engaging, and much more. But what should ultimately be taken away is that it's much more than pure nostalgia that keeps this game relevant. Yes, nostalgia is a factor for almost anything, and especially for Black Ops 2, but I would argue that we have that nostalgia for a reason, because there was something truly special experienced during this time, and that's not something that you can take away very easily. It's truly a 1 in a billion video game that its unique energy can never quite be recaptured in the same way. It's flawed but memorable from front to back, and it's become integral to COD's legacy so much that newer games cannot help but invoke its imagery in everything they do. But BO2 was absolutely the pioneer, the one that paved the way for the rest to follow, and for that reason, Call of Duty Black Ops 2 will truly never die.